GETTYMEPs voted overwhelmingly to keep the UK shackled to a number of EU lawsEurophile MEPs last week voted overwhelmingly in favour of demanding that the UK must adhere to EU policies on tax, competition, the environment and workers' rights after Brexit in an audacious attack on the UK's quest to become a low-tax, low-regulation global free trade pioneer. In a move that will anger Brexiteers Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, who are pushing for Britain to be completely free of Brussels bureaucracy, almost three-quarters 74% of MEPs demanded that the UK should also adopt EU rules on climate change, consumer rights and data protection in any trade deal in a series of votes on Wednesday. And in an act likely to enrage the 17.4 million Brits who voted for Brexit, nearly 80% called for Britain to be denied a future share of EU assets. More than three-quarters also refused to back an amendment intended to safeguard the territorial integrity of the UK, with embittered MEPs voting down the idea of member states being allowed to develop their own links with the UK. Furious Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg said the EU's position would reduce Britain to the status of a colony. Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg was furious at the vote. It's quite clear that the vast majority of UK MEPs are not representing the vast majority of the voters. UKIP MEP Nathan Gill. Although the votes are not binding, they indicate the thinking of the MEPs who appear intent on punishing Britain for voting for Brexit. They also suggest that the EU Parliament plans to veto any deal that appears to give Britain some form of self-governance outside the bloc. As Tory rebels last week backed an amendment giving MPs a meaningful vote on Brexit, MEPs in Brussels also considered a series of amendments on Britain's future relationship with the EU, led by ultra-federalist Guy Verhofstadt, leader of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe group. 79% of MEPs rejected the idea of UK judges ruling in disputes arising from a future trade deal, while 76% said they wanted Britain to remain bound by the European Court of Justice. This is despite the Phase 1 agreement Prime Minister Theresa May has signed with the EU, stating that the ECJ should only be voluntarily consulted by British judges when it comes to cases involving EU citizens for which there is no legal precedent. They also rejected in droves the notion of the UK retaining any decision-making autonomy after Brexit. 77% and voted overwhelmingly against the terms of a transitional deal being agreed before March 29, 2019. Mrs May had hoped to start talks on the transitional and trade deals immediately, although the EU has indicated it will not begin Phase 2 of the negotiations until March and expects the UK to observe all of its rules, including on freedom of movement, and accept the jurisdiction of the ECJ during the transition stage from 2019 to 2021. Mrs May is said to favour a Canada Plus deal for the UK and will chair a Brexit war cabinet meeting tomorrow to thrash out the UK's ideal end state before giving a statement to the House of Commons on last week's EU Council meeting, which gave the green light to sufficient progress being made in Phase 1 of the negotiations to move on to trade talks. GETTYMEPs May signed an agreement with the ECJ that they will only be voluntarily consulted by UK judges. The entire cabinet will then further discuss the proposals on Tuesday. A source close to the EU's Brexit negotiators said Mr Gove and Mr Johnson can go whistle if they think they will be able to massively deregulate the UK and have a trade deal with the EU after Brexit. It was a swipe at Boris' suggestion that Brussels could go whistle at the suggestion of Britain paying a £100 million divorce bill. UKIP MEP Nathan Gill said it's quite clear that the vast majority of UK MEPs are not representing the vast majority of the voters but are instead siding with federalist Europhiles who seem to think Brexit is about making the UK a colony of the EU. Perhaps it should be called Brussels syndrome, as so many have become as self-obsessed and unaccountable to the country as the EU itself. I would like to remind them that they were elected to represent Britain, not Brussels, and put the interests of our nation first, not enable power-hungry EU addicts running the show in Brussels to plot whatever they like.